The funny thing about COO, and it must be interesting for you doing a podcast, I think COO means something different at every company. It's one of those jobs it's really whatever the CEO needs to complete them and help them operate the company.
Today's guest is Lauren Antonoff, Chief Operating Officer at Life360, a company helping families stay connected and protected. Lauren's career spans nearly 3 decades across tech giants like Microsoft and GoDaddy, where she held senior leadership roles focused on product innovation, customer value, and scalable growth. In this conversation today, we dive into how Lauren builds trust when stepping into a new organization, how she keeps her team aligned through focused product decisions, and why a board should be a strategic partner, not a hurdle, and many more amazing topics. If you are a COO navigating change, driving product strategy, or leading cross-functional teams, this episode is packed with insights you won't want to miss. We are here live with Lauren Antonoff. Welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. I'm excited to talk.
Yeah, me too. I was just telling you before reading your bio on LinkedIn, I was super excited for this conversation because you have had quite the career. So it is such an honor to be having this conversation today. And I would love to just kick it off for anyone who has not read your bio yet. Give us a little bit of your background and how you landed at Life360.
Yeah, it was interesting because I certainly, if you had asked me 20 years ago, where will I end up? I may not have been able to predict it. I got started in technology sort of as an accident, and I landed at Microsoft through an acquisition. I said they diagnosed me as a product manager, what Microsoft used to call a program manager. But I'm just somebody who likes to make things happen, and I see something in the world, and I'm like, it could be better. And that's kind of propelled me through my career at Microsoft, which was largely focused on product. When I left, I moved to GoDaddy, and that's the first time I started to take more of a general management, sort of an operational role it was product oriented, but it was product plus a broader set of responsibilities. And I was there during the pandemic, which was a super intense time as it was at many companies. We were in sort of growth mode during the pandemic. We got a boost from the pandemic. And afterwards, I needed a break. And, I wanted to do something totally different, and I thought, maybe healthcare or something like that. But I was on a vacation with my family, and my family vacations with a dog. And, so we had my pup, and we were in Vegas, and, he escaped doggy daycare. It was like a crazy thing. And, we ended up, um we got all this advice about how to get your dog back and all this stuff, but part of it was to stay in the same place, which for us meant sleeping physically on the street outside of a doggy daycare in Vegas. Hoping he would come back. It's a happy ending. We did get him back after those 2 days. But then I went and I researched pet tracking devices because he didn't have any kind of tracker on him or anything like that. And I made like an offhand comment to my husband. I was like, well, these things seem okay, but I would never, they're just not practical for me. And I had a list of reasons. I'm like, I should go fix that. I was like offhand. And then a month later, as I was like starting to look for work, I got a call from a recruiter, and it was Life360. And Life360 owned Tile, and they owned a GPS tracking device. And I was like, wait, I could actually go fix this. So that was like a little bit of serendipity. And, one thing led to another, and here I am.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, when I looked at the website, I saw the tile pieces. And so I was
Yeah.
familiar with the tile company, but not
Yeah.
like 360. So do you know what is the story on how all of those companies kind of merged into one?
Yeah. I mean, Chris started this company years ago. Actually, I just found out actually the company goes back longer than I thought. It goes back to when he was like in business school. It was like a case study or a pitch he had to do. And the idea originally sort of came around the time of Hurricane Katrina and, getting families back together after a disaster. But it really evolved from there as he pivoted and sort of found product market fit of just the notion on keeping families safe and connected. And, that's at the core of what we do. We say our mission is to keep people close to the ones they love. And then the strategy has evolved around that being connecting and protecting people to the people, pets, and things they love. And for him, it was very easy to look at Tile and this other acquisition he did around the same time, which is GeoBit, which is the thing that will become our pet tracker. Um, and say, he needed to go beyond the phone to reach into the real world. and have the kind of products that would allow him to extend beyond that into more of your everyday life.
Mm, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so cool. I remember those pitch competitions back in college,
Yeah.
and I remember wondering, like, do any of these actually go anywhere? So,
Now you know. Now you
being
know.
one of the first that I've heard that's actually awesome.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't know if it was a pitch or a business case or whatever, but he's still in touch with the professor. We actually just did a little he did a little chat, and he invited me. I get to listen in to him talking to his professor's students, 20 years later. Pretty fun.
that's so cool. Oh my gosh, I love that. Were you brought on as COO 2 years ago, or was it a different role?
Yeah, I was brought on as COO, but the funny thing about COO, and it must be interesting for you doing a podcast, I think COO means something different at every company. It's one of those jobs it's really whatever the CEO needs to complete them and help them operate the company. And so there had been a couple other COOs at the company that had had different jobs previously, but what he wanted and what they had done was pretty different. And I think it actually came out of the Tile acquisition where, before the Tile acquisition, it was a smaller company. He was sort of the chief. He was sort of all the things. He was the executive staff, and he certainly had people there helping him. But it was sort of a manageable size. People had grown up with him. He was doing great. And then he did an acquisition, and acquisitions are just hard. They're just really hard. And now he had, twice as many people and, they came from really different backgrounds. They worked in different ways, and it just became unwieldy. It was much harder to get alignment and momentum than it had been before. And I think that's when they started to think like, oh, I think I need somebody who's sort of operated at bigger scale before and has a common vision, but sort of knows how to do it with all these people coming from all these backgrounds.
Mhm.
So
It sounds like he knew that he needed something different, and earlier when you were sharing about kinda how you got there, you were also wanting something different at that point where
yeah,
I'm I've been in this interesting place where recently I've been thinking, "Man, I've been in my industry for, like, geez, 14, 15 years now, and I'm getting the bug to go just do something different in a different
it's
lane, a
fun.
different industry." I would love if you would share a little bit of details on, like, was there any doubt that came up going into something new? And what was that journey going into something different like for you?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I tend to have something that I'm super clear on. Like when I started in the industry way back when, I was very clear that I was going to be a civil rights lawyer. Like I was not imagining that I was going to go into tech. But I was working, sort of on that path. I was at UC Berkeley. I got a computer for, just writing papers and stuff. And then I just got sucked into that world. I just found I had one question after another and sort of curiosity got the best of me. And, I was on a different path. And I think this was similar where I was pretty clear that I wanted to do something different. But in my mind, the different was healthcare. Like I didn't think like, oh, I want to do a consumer mobile app. It didn't occur to me. And I actually found healthcare was really hard to break into. And I have a great network. I'm really connected. I have a great experience in a lot of things, but I hadn't worked in healthcare. And the healthcare industry was surprisingly, or it surprised me. Maybe it's not surprising, but it was surprising to me that, they're like, oh, well, we want people who have 15 years in healthcare. And I'm like, that seems silly. So, um, I think it wasn't that it was scary to me to make a change or do something different. I think technology people, we're always inventing the future. We should always be doing things that are really different. But it was surprising that it wasn't going to work the way I thought it was going to work, or at least it wasn't surprising. It was surprising that specifically healthcare was so difficult to break into. Um, but I think the key as you consider, your path, it's being open to the possibilities as they unfold, like knowing, like having a hypothesis, but knowing there's a decent chance it's wrong and that you're going to have to go a different direction. And I think that ability to be open to opportunities as they unfold is important in a lot of dimensions, like at work and outside of work. And yeah,
Yeah, I love that. And it definitely sounds like you were in a place where you were open. Like you said, it was this serendipitous that lost your dog and you were like, man, there should be something for this. And then it just kind of fell into your lap, which is so
yeah,
perfect.
yeah.
What was
I feel
the
very lucky.
what was the initial 90 days when you came in? What were your objectives? What did you do in that first
Yeah.
90 days? What was that like?
I can't remember what we wrote down. We wrote down a set of stuff, but a lot of it was like learning the organization, getting to know people. It was a huge space. It was a new space, new people, new team, lots of new stuff. The interesting thing, regardless of what we wrote down, is that it didn't take more than a couple of weeks for me to sort of put my teeth into some stuff and start driving change. And it wasn't that I had planned to do it that way. It's that the business operates at the pace that it operates. And, one of the things that was happening as I joined, the team was just about ready to do a launch on the tracking device. Like the very thing that had drawn me in. And it was like a refresh using the same standalone brand, which, and it was a small business. And this is like, the next upgrade on the small standalone business. And I'm like, we bought this like 2 years ago. What do you mean we're doing standalone again? Like that's not going to work.
And when you say standalone, what does that mean?
Not integrated on its own brand. So in my mind, it was releasing a good product, but a good product that any other company could release. It's not taking advantage of our size and scale. It's not taking advantage of our brand, and so it really would have to fight on its own. And none of those synergies that we imagined were there. Like the only synergy is like we're under the same umbrella. And I've been through a lot of acquisitions. Well, I've been through I've been through a lot of stuff. But I could sort of know that it would be hard for that, even with a newer version of the product and market. It'd be very hard for it to become materially relevant to our business. And then that would mean that if we stayed on that path, eventually we'd look at it and go, "That's not a big enough business," and we would kill it. But I came for that, so I don't want it to go down the path where eventually we have to kill it. So I took kind of a dramatic action, which was to say, like, we're not gonna do a launch of it. We're gonna actually pull all the marketing dollars off it. We're gonna pull all the people off it, and we're gonna put them on the original purpose, which is making that thing get reborn within the context of Life 360 as a Life 360 integrated experience, as a Life 360 offering. And that's just coming to fruition later this year. So, but it was definitely taking the resources off something that was working, but working in a way that was likely gonna lead to me not having a pet tracker that was gonna be, in every home.
Right. Wow. And the initial kind of finding when you were like, "Oh, this is the direction that I think we should go." And that was early when you came in, like right
Yeah, it was a
away?
couple weeks in. It was probably my first month.
How did you get buy-in from everybody else when you're new and no one knows you yet? Like,
Yeah.
how did you build the trust?
Well, I sort of borrowed a little bit from Amazon style a little bit where I wrote a doc and I wrote down sort of the arguments, for why we might take this course. But I also wrote down the arguments why we shouldn't. Like what are the objections? What are the counter arguments? And really sought for everybody to get all their ideas, brought people into that process to get all the ideas and all the arguments on paper so that we could really process it. And it sort of came down to the strategy which had powered the deal in the first place, which was this notion of protecting, keeping people, pets, and things safe. And so, it came back to like our goal is to grow the core brand and the strategy and, help me understand how that's gonna like how is that gonna accrue to this suite that we're building. And as people sort of try to explain how that was gonna work, then they're like, well, maybe this other thing would be better. And so it took a couple weeks from there, I think, to get everyone on the same page. And I think it was a little bit of a scary for the people who worked on it because they thought of their value as being very much attached to the standalone thing. And now we're saying, well, we might not do it. And so we had to really build belief that we were actually going to do it in an integrated way and it was actually going to be, orders of magnitude, bigger reach and more opportunity. But the team's cooking now.
That's amazing.
Yep.
Very cool. It sounds like because you said that you almost went to school to be a lawyer.
Yeah. Well, that's what I thought I was going to do. I studied rhetoric and poli sci.
Okay, got it. Well, it sounds like, you're kinda able to bring in a little bit of that into your role where you're like, yeah, you've
Eh,
got a case and you've got this side and this side. One of the things that I learned when I was in sales was about you can persuade people by using doubt. So it's a to like convince them of something, sometimes you just convince them in the opposite direction of asking questions that have them step back and go, oh, shoot, I actually don't know why we're doing this. And then you can fill in the gaps with your expertise and the route that you think that you should go.
Yeah. I think that's right, and I mean, this might be a little bit of a different way to say it, but for me to really bring someone along, it means that I have to be open to being wrong. Like, I have to be open to really hearing, well, maybe they are right. Like, let's invite them to explain that. Let's invite them to educate me. And in the process, if I'm right, then we'll uncover together, the things that I'm trying to get across. But I might also uncover, like, no, there might be a better way.
And it does take some dropping of ego. Especially when you're being brought in and I'm sure kind of put on a pedestal in some ways of all the experience that you have and you come in and people are like, okay, this person's coming. At least I've experienced sometimes there's this feeling of like this person's coming in to save something that might be falling apart or
Yeah.
people are frustrated with. So some people are really excited to have someone come in and then to be willing to, like you said, be wrong or shift direction is brave, but also what's best for the business.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny that you talk about the pedestal because I think some of that is true. Like people are like, oh, you're supposed to come in and bring a lot of value. But there's also a lot of, at the same time, there's like, well, prove it. Like there's the equal amount of like, well, you don't know how it works here. You don't know how it works in this industry. So there's like this, you're kind of in both positions at the same time where you're being held up a little and, pushed down a little. And I think that's true in a lot of positions, when somebody's appointed to a new job and you're like, you get that tailwind, but you also have people going, I wonder if they can make it. What
Right.
cut it?
Is there any strategy, I don't know if that's the right word, but strategies or methods or principles that you took with you into the transition that really allowed you to build deeper relationships with people to build that trust faster?
Yeah. I don't know about specific strategies. I mean, I think one of it is just knowing that you gotta build it. Like there's no there's no magical thing, or at least I don't know the magical thing. If you know it, somebody else knows it. I'd love to learn about it. But some of it is you just have to get wins together, and there's kind of no shortcut. And so just knowing that it's not going to be easy at first, and that you have to sort of persist through it being hard. Um, I think that's a lot of being successful in business, right? It's just staying in it when you hit that first like, oh, the market's not going to accept that. What do we need to do differently? And instead of going like, oh, it failed, you say like, oh, here's a change, right? Here's what we learned, and you go at it again. And I think it's humans are kind of like that too. Just when you enter an org, it's not like everybody's going to love you and it's going to be easy. It's just being prepared, like, they'll like me more when we start winning together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could totally see that. And it sounds like you oversee quite a few functions. Like you said, every COO role is different. I think I read you're in charge of product marketing and ops. How do you balance execution and accountability across all of those very different areas?
Yeah. It's funny, they're all different, but they're also all the same. Like everybody's working towards the same goals. And so, I tend not to think about what's so different. I tend to think about where are we all going together and then what needs to happen to get people rowing in the same direction. And some of that is with just the clarity of why we're doing what we're doing, what are we doing, and what's our plan. And then, what I want to be able to do is count on the leaders of those different functions to be a team that's all pulling in the same direction. And then they can hold their teams accountable. And my job is to make them, you know, have common purpose and common direction across those things. When I say I want to, when I first came in, the leadership team was sort of at an earlier stage, and so a lot of what I had to do in my first, not 90 days, but first year was fill out that leadership team and got to hire a CMO and a CTO. And, we've built out from there. And that's really helped a lot.
Epic. I would be curious to hear, even though you're all rowing in the same direction, when you're hiring for these leadership positions in roles that maybe you don't have as much personal knowledge in. How do you make sure that someone is bring like if you're like, hey, you're not hitting this metric or this goal that we set, and they've got their reasons why, how are you able to determine if that reason why is a good reason if you don't personally know from personal experience? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think in some ways, for instance, deciding to hire a CMO, I felt like I didn't have the expertise to keep the current team accountable, and that I wanted someone to, who to manage across the marketing functions who really could call BS on, something that might be going on. And so you know, a lot of it is being able to ask the right questions, having people that I know, I'm close with a CEO, CMO that I work with at GoDaddy, so I, call that person for counsel sometimes. But a lot of it is really just that relationship with that leader about, you know, how do I come to understand, what the outcomes are and what to expect. And the business is the business. It doesn't sort of matter what the reasons are that things aren't working. Either I believe that we're doing as well as we can, or I believe that that person is, not doing what I need from them. And I can't necessarily know the whys behind it. Um, I can know the outcomes. Did we hit the things that we're hitting, and do I still have the belief that this is the right person to lead the function? Um, and you kind of can't know for sure. You just have to um trust your own judgment, be clear on the outcomes that you're expecting, and you know use your judgment.
Yeah. Is there anything in the last couple years where maybe you had an intuition on something or a judgment call that you went with that was not the right move, and any failures or learning lessons that you would like to share from that place?
Yeah, well, I'm sure there are others because, intuition's a really important part of the job, but intuition, it fails. Like it doesn't work all the time. I know one of the hardest things that my CEO and I have gone through sort of while I've been in this role, and it wasn't a particular business fail because it didn't get that far, but um uh, since I was hired, one of the main things that, he had a goal for me that he could go on sabbatical, right? That he would feel comfortable enough that he could take some time off. And so, we finally got to that point. He took some time off. We kept in touch while he was gone, and it actually went really well. We were both, like, really, really happy with it. And then he came back, and he was looking at some experiments that we were doing, and I sort of set it up so that the team's really transparent about their hypotheses and what they're doing, and so he was able to sort of see all the stuff in flight. And he looked at one of them, and he noticed some stuff I didn't notice in what they were doing, and he was really concerned that the team was sort of doing something that wasn't in the best interest of our free members, that it was like taking away something that we had effectively promised them, sort of an implied promise, and pulling back on customer value. And I didn't necessarily see it the same way, but when they had showed me, like, I looked at the what the team had sort of proposed at face value, and it sort of made sense to me, and it was had a lot of upside on the business, and I had kind of gone ahead and said to the team, "Yeah, go for it." And he saw it, and he was like, "You've lost your mind," basically. Like, like, aren't we so aligned on what, sort of believing in free members and the value we deliver to them, and yet here I was approving this thing, and it actually, um, it hurt the trust between us for a while, and it took us a bunch of time and work to say, like, why when we think we're on the same page, like, how could we have such a different response to that? It led to some good outcomes, including sort of writing an internal, members bill of rights, and a way to codify this and make it clear. But that was sort of like a moment where, I was using reasonably good judgment, I thought, but didn't see something that his experience with the product and business that he just spotted really quickly. I think in the end, we would have caught it. But, having got that far and having him get surprised by it, especially when he was coming back from having his hand off the wheel for a couple of months, that was a hard it was hard for both of us for a little while.
Yeah, I could see that, but thank you for sharing and your vulnerability in that. I'm sure many people can relate in different ways. Was there any outcomes that came out of that in terms of your guys' communication or finding ways to make sure that you're on the same page, aligned, that you've implemented since then that have helped?
Yeah, I mean, first, we've sort of been clear on, like, what are those tricky bits that we wanna pre-align on. And the Bill of Rights, I think, is an example of one of those things where we sort of set out, these are principles that we should always use, and here are cases that we would just wanna talk about. They just need that extra level of scrutiny, so even talking about that is good. We've always spent a lot of time together. Even before I started, we were spending, 20 hours a week when I wasn't working here in the presumably in the interview process, but really sort of getting to know each other, know how each other thinks. And now we spend pretty much the better part of a day together every week. So it's a lot of time. But it definitely helps avoid those surprises. So I would say more communication and then finding those problem points and deciding, like, okay, that would need to be an explicit conversation.
Mhm. Those are a little bit of touching on maybe the failures or the things that didn't go as planned, but
Yeah.
what is a big success that you guys have had in the last year, and why does it matter?
Yeah, we've had a lot of successes. I just came back from we had a very good earnings this quarter. And so the business as a whole is going really well. I think the exciting things for me, I'm, like, fundamentally a product person, and our CEO is too. Like, we sort of share in loving the value we create for customers. So the things that I'm excited about, in terms of what we're sort of on the cusp of delivering. One, we're starting to create a vision of the product as it should be a couple years from now, but we're delivering things out the door that are in the direction of that. So we just released a massive update to our map experience, so like the core of the product, like the main thing that people see when they check on their families 5 times a day. So really good leaps in the product coming out. But then we also are just getting ready to fully integrate Tile into Life360. So late last year, we delivered the first feature in Tile that requires Life360, and that's the ability to send an SOS to your circle, to the people in your family. And so you can press the Tile device and have that send a notice, and that's something that it's not integration for integration's sake. It's like a very purposeful connection between the 2. But now, you can take a Tile and actually activate it in the Life360 app, and soon that will become the main way that people use Tile instead of a standalone app. So that notion of having that fully integrated experience is becoming real. It's like the opposite of what I discovered when I came in and we were doing this sort of standalone tracker launch. Now that those integrated experiences are going out the door, and it's been a tremendous amount of work. Then the team has had to do so much work with everything from the technical platform work to the experiences to the marketing. And so watching that come together is a proud moment.
Yeah, that's really cool. I would love to know how you choose which customer problems are worth solving and putting energy into, because I'm sure there's a million different ways. This is some
Million.
companies that I've been at where I'm an ideas person, and one of the best things that the CEO I was working with said is, "This is a great idea, and it's also a diversion of focus from the thing that's already working." So when there's so much opportunity, how have you guys been able to pick those areas that you're gonna put the tremendous amount of work into that are really worth going that far with?
Yeah, good question. And one of the most important questions, I think, if you talk about what makes a successful COO or a successful company, I think that focus is a clear part of that. We started with really getting focused on our strategy. Like, you have to know the why to know the what. Uh, to make good choices, you have to know where you're going, what your objectives are, and what are those major drivers of the objective. So we started by doing a bunch of strategy work and laying the groundwork for, you know, just getting everyone on the same page about what we're trying to accomplish. And then we did a strategy planning exercise where it was like the opposite of being focused. It was like, let a thousand flowers bloom. Like, let's get all the ideas out on the table. Because if you don't get them all out on the table, at some point in time, they sort of pop up. Oh, we forgot about this. This might be better. But if once a year, you're like, let's get it all out. We're going to look at the whole field and then we're going to make choices. And we're going to look to the strategy and we're going to say, what do we think are the things that are going to really move the needle to get to the strategy? And you make a small number of choices. In this last year, we picked 4 things to invest in, and we said those are the 4 things. That doesn't mean we won't do anything else, but it means that nothing else can compromise these 4. Like these 4 have to get done and can push other things out of the way, and nothing can push them out of the way. And so I think that process of getting focused on the long term where you're going, being open to a lot of ideas infrequently, for us it's once a year, and then being disciplined about saying, beyond that, these are the things that are the focus, and next year we'll talk about it again.
Yes. Oh, it's so good, and it makes you think of, I don't know if you knew Cameron has written a book called Vivid Vision, but he's got
Oh yeah.
YouTube videos, he speaks on stage about crafting vision and the importance of creating a 3-year vision because it's long enough that you can really dream big and have expansive thoughts, but it's small enough that it still feels doable. And then when you're really clear on that and you can communicate it to your team, people start almost weeding out their own, when they have ideas, if they're clear on where you're going and the idea doesn't match, you're not going to have your team bring you a bunch of stuff that's like, no, that's not where we're going. It's not where we're going. So I really appreciate the share on knowing where you're going and then making your decisions based off of that. One other thing that I would love to talk about is in terms of your team management. It sounds like you've led some pretty large teams through multiple transformations at the different companies that you've been at. What do you believe is the key to maintaining, outside of just knowing where you're going, maintaining alignment across different departments that are all working on different things, but still needing to be cohesive?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it comes to this clarity of purpose, knowing why we're doing what we're doing and knowing what that long-term vision is. You can have very different teams working on very different things, but there's something that brings them all together. When I was working on Office, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, all those apps are very different apps. They obviously have very different features, but in any given release, there was always something that we shared. There was one version of Office where our biggest business problem was that everybody already had Office and liked it, and we had to figure out, like, why would they buy another version? And so, we painted a picture of, what it would look like to have a version of Office where you could look at the old thing and go like, "That's old and outdated." Like, what did it mean to obsolete something that everybody had? And what were gonna be those features and the way of looking and all those ways that would help make that happen. And so, even though there might be a particular, Word feature or particular PowerPoint feature that was completely independent of that, we all had obligations to make those sort of shared tenants. Those were things that gave birth to like the Office ribbon, the way that the toolbar is, and they used to be skinny toolbars and now there's these big, thick, fat things. That was sort of an example of one of those things that we all had to lean into to make the whole fit together. And just this notion that the whole is more important than any one part. I think that's maybe one of the sort of the key tenets is that, it's not about you delivering on your team's, like your job as a leader is not delivering on your team's part. It's your job is to bring your team along in service of the thing that's bigger. And I think when the leaders are excited about the thing that's bigger than their team and know that their team is working in service of that, then then everybody wants to kind of work together and row the boat to accomplish this outsized outcome.
Wow. I love that you just said that the way you did. Because I've experienced in teams where departments are siloed and there's almost this like even you were saying when you're coming into a company, like you don't know how this works.
Yeah.
Like there can even be that energy inside a company because people haven't stepped into each other's shoes or done different jobs. And it's like, we're the ones doing all this over here and well, we're doing this and this is more valuable than that. And so I think there being this bigger overarching umbrella of we're all here for the same mission and it takes all of us rowing in the same direction to make it happen.
Yeah. It should it's still hard. Like I still like as much as I see it all as like one piece, I still hear from my teams that, one team will find that they're bumping up against, some boundary with another team. Like cross teamwork. This was true in my it's true in every company I've ever known. Like cross teamwork is difficult. And teams still struggle with those boundaries sometimes. And there's all sorts of sort of consistent nurturing that those relationships need, and consistent sort of adjusting to help teams get through those complexities. But having that common purpose and that greater vision helps.
Yeah. What about when you're building up the pipelines for your teams for hiring or you're putting new people into leadership positions? What are the qualities that you're most looking for in those leadership positions that you're bringing in?
Yeah. Um, I definitely it's sort of this balance between having sort of their own sort of clarity of vision and believing that they can come in and provide that insight and direction, but also sort of balance with the humility of like being willing to be part of the team and not needing to be the smartest one who has all the answers. It's a funny balance because you want people who are independent thinkers. You want somebody who's not just, especially at the most senior leadership, you can't have people who are waiting to be told what to do, but you also can't have people who are like, "Okay, I'm gonna go do this. I don't care what the rest of you are doing." And so that I think it's that the balance and maybe the EQ to navigate the balance between providing leadership and direction, but also recognizing that they're part of a team and that they value being part of a team and that they're gonna put energy into being part of a team.
What are the ways that you support leadership under you? Do you have a weekly meeting cadence, reporting systems? What is that relationship person to person with on the people under your leadership?
Yeah, well, we do a bunch of things. My direct leadership team, we meet and when I say my direct leadership team, like that's the CEO and I, like all of the company leaders. It's not the people who report to me. So the company leaders, we get together once a week to stay in touch, to talk about whatever those sort of most important bubble up issues are. We also get together in person, so that one is on Zoom, but we get together in person about every 6 weeks. That's a practice that happened long before I got there. We're a remote first company, and the Chris and our head of HR have done. Chris is our CEO, and our head of HR have done a really great job, sort of figuring out how to make a remote first company work. And part of that is spending a lot of time together. And so we get together every 6 weeks and we spend, a couple of days going through whatever the things are that are hard and really uh, developing a sort of a shared view and tackling problems together in person. And then there's some other mechanisms that are broader that bring in more of the team. Like once a week, we have an operations meeting that brings in sort of the next layer down, and we're talking about how the business is performing. What are those things? How do we create awareness across teams so each team is sort of sharing out what got done and what's coming up, those kind of things, and we can problem solve in the room. We always have that time together so we can problem solve together. I think one of the things I don't do or what I think I'm not interested in, I'm like, I sort of hate like status reports where people say, "This is the long list. These are the ways that I'm busy." Like, I don't what I care about is what you did, what got done, and what did we learn from it, and how is it progressing? Or how did it, how is it progressing the business? And then what do you focus on next? But what I'm not interested in is like, how did you spend your time, hour by hour? Like, I feel like it doesn't matter. What am I gonna say? You're spending your time in the wrong way, but you're getting the right outcomes, or vice versa. Oh, I think you're spending your time so well. Too bad that the business is not working. Let's look at the business and use that.
Key outcomes. I remember someone actually. I learned this through someone who learned it through Cameron's program, which I ended up later doing. Which he has a program called COO Alliance, where COOs come and it's a year-long program, and there's calls and trainings. It was amazing for me. But before I was in it, I learned from this guy named Rohit, who is the COO of GrowRev. And I was telling him about some issues I was experiencing with my team. And he's like, well, what are your numbers to know that they're on track? I'm like, well, I've got this KPI and this KPI. He's like, you need one number. What's the one number for any, even if it's like operational where you don't think that there could be a number? Like there's always something you can find that establishes the key outcome. And then everything else you build under that. And so if you've got your sales team, their key number is, cash collected. It may be cash collected over, number of sales. Like what a lot of sales teams will do is they'll pick, well, we want 20 sales. But if you've got all those 20 sales only with deposits, that's not really the number one number that we want to look for. It's cash collected up front. So finding that one number and then you build, the meetings and the end of days or whatever. It sounds like kind of what you're saying is what are the key outcomes and getting the information in alignment with that.
Yeah.
Sounds right.
Generally speaking. I can't imagine one number for an entire business. There are businesses, Facebook had sort of some magic numbers like that. We have, I would say, more than one number, but a small number of numbers, small number of KPIs, and then we ladder down from those.
To clarify, not one number for the whole business, but per role. So, like, yeah, if you're a salesperson, what's the one thing that you can kind of track for them? And I'm sure there are other roles that you need multiple numbers for. What are some other ways that you guys, it sounds like there's the investing into your team from a 2 days in person, and you've got some of these meetings. Are there other ways that you invest in your team? Like, for the COO Alliance, we may have a CEO pay for their COO to be in the programs that they're learning, and it's not something that the CEO is pouring into them day on day on something that they are not actually best at. What are the ways that you guys invest into the people on your team?
Yeah. I'd say we're early in that journey. We haven't done as much on internal development in those kind of programs. We're starting to do more training and more thinking about that. I think as we develop our leadership team, for example, AI is a big hot topic. And so we're working with our teams to figure out what does that mean for your function and what support do your teams need, both in terms of AI tools and things like that, but also just to be able to engage in a conversation about AI. So we're early in the training journey, but starting to think about what that means.
From a culture standpoint, because I know I was thinking about AI and just the different energy that can come up with people in team about what that means and resistance to change and yeah, just being able to culturally have people be open and receptive. I'd be curious to hear a little bit about your guys' culture. Do you guys have core values? It sounds like the Bill of Rights. I'd be curious to hear more about that and how that maybe, combines into that. What is your culture like?
Yeah. So the CEO, especially, and working really closely with our head of HR, did a great job, I think, helping to define the culture, coming up with those values. And we only have 4 values. Sometimes teams have like 7 values, and you can't even name them off. But they've done a really good job, sort of culling the list and really getting them focused on the things that matter. And they come up a lot in conversations. They're not, just things we talk about once a year in a company meeting or something like that. They live and play a very active role, I would say, as we go week to week. There was a part of the question, though, that you asked that fed into this about, about GM. Oh, yeah, and the Bill of Rights. Okay, so there's a lot of prices. Anyway, the core values and the culture, I think, has been well defined. Although culture is how those things are practiced rather than what you say necessarily. And so we do things like in our all hands meetings, sort of celebrating different core values. But we also think about it in terms, let's use AI for example. As we're thinking about how to put AI into play, how can we find ways to amplify those and find examples as people practice them where they're exhibiting our core values. So one of our core values is members before metrics, the idea that we care about customer value ahead of just moving the needles in some report somewhere. And so, thinking about, okay, so with that in mind, what does AI mean for our members and how do we make sure that AI is actually helping us deliver more value and not just, saving money, for example. And so I think there's ways that the values can come out and be expressed in any problems that you tackle. Um, when something new like AI comes on the field, and and it can be scary to people, and we've definitely seen certain functions get really excited and other functions get really nervous. Uh, I think we're trying to do the same thing we do all the time, which is getting people to look out and say like, what does this mean for us? Like, where are we going? We're a small company. We have 500-ish people. But we have work that could be thousands of people. So for us, AI isn't a way to, save money and make our workforce smaller. For us, it's a way to act like a company with 5,000 people. And, encouraging people to say, how can this be a force multiplier for you? and invoke their creativity at solving this. And we're like on the journey there. I think some parts of the team are super excited and comfortable and jump in. Other parts are like, well, what are we allowed to do and what are we not allowed to do? And we're still at sort of that process of making sure that people feel empowered. And uh, we talk about agency a lot, the notion of, people making things happen, not because they were told to, but because they're in a job and this will help them deliver the outcomes and they can sort of take that step to make things happen. And so we're nurturing that as we go.
Yes, that's beautiful. Just the freedom to kind of take the reins and go explore and see how it works. And I love what you said about how can it not be about shrinking our team, but making just our team more effective? Because I know in a team that I was recently working with, talking about AI, especially with outsourced workers. I don't know how big your guys' outsourced team is, but I've worked with a couple recruiting companies, that's specifically recruiting from the Philippines. Like our whole team was the Philippines. And there's a lot of fear around, getting replaced. And so I think, yeah, that switch for anyone that's listening, if you're introducing AI, being able to bring it to your team as, hey, this is just to make your role even more indispensable because you're able to do the work of 50 people instead of
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, this would be my advice to people who are worried about getting replaced. Try to think about how you're gonna help replace yourself. I mean, that's what software has to do, right? Like, if you're Office and you're worried about Office getting replaced, you have to think about, like, how do we replace that old version and come up with something that's indispensable? And I think that's true with individuals and the jobs that you're in. If you're like, I wonder if technology could do my job," be the one who figures out how that happens, and that it opens the next set of doors, and the next set of doors generally are an order of magnitude more opportunity, and they'll need more people, but they'll need them doing something different. Uh, so
Yes, thank
deep
you
in
for that. Lean into it. On that note, I love to always ask kind of to wrap up, what is something that you are leaning into or you're most excited about both in business and personally in the next, say, 6 months?
ah, let's see. Uh, certainly in our business, I mean, I feel like a broken record just talking about AI, but AI is pretty transformative for everything in tech. So in the business, I think thinking about how AI can accelerate every part of our business, um, uh, I would say that's the company one. Um, Personally, a thing that I've been leaning into is getting a lot closer with my board. When I came to the company, and it was one of the first priorities Chris, our CEO, had for me is, get to know the board, spend more time with them. And in the beginning, I felt like, oh, well, I'm too busy running the business to get to know the board. Like the board is something for quarterly board meetings. I really thought of it as, I present to the board, periodically, and I don't know why it's so important for me to get to know these people. It took me a while and a lot of insistence from Chris to sort of like understand that the board is actually there to help us, and they have a lot to offer, and to be more open and, really leveraging them. So now I'm meeting with them a lot more often. I'm getting a whole lot of value out of it that I didn't really know was possible. And so I guess, I would say that's part of my personal development as a leader who's used to managing sort of down and sort of within the context of the management team to sort of open up to, leverage the board more.
Well, and is this your first time experiencing working with a board?
It's the first time working with them in this way, let's say at GoDaddy, our board was, when I joined, it was a private equity board, and, we would sort of show up on a quarterly basis, and, I felt like, and I don't know if this was true or not, but my sort of perception was like the board was a hurdle that I had to get things past. Like, it wasn't, I didn't think of the board, and maybe I may have missed out on opportunities. We had some amazing board members, but I didn't think of them as a resource to leverage in helping me do my job better. And so I think maybe that's a personal growth thing of just coming to understand that, like, no, actually, these are, like, amazing people, and they're there to help and, make things happen. So now that I'm using them in a much more constructive way, I'm getting a ton of value from it.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm sure for anyone who's listening that might be going into a new role with the board or is currently in a team where there's a board, maybe you sparked some
Yep.
inspiration. Go have some deeper conversations and lean on those.
It's good. It's good. You just open yourself up. I think it was hard for me, in part because I was used to that relationship where it was a hurdle and not an opportunity.
Oh,
And to
amazing. What
reframe that.
an opportunity now. Thank you so much for your time. This was incredible. If anyone wants to reach out or they have a question, is there anywhere that they could follow you or send you a message?
Well, I'm probably most active on LinkedIn, but not that active. But LinkedIn is probably the best place.
Okay, awesome.
Lauren A.
Thank you so much for your time. This was amazing. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.